You're listening to In Cap We Trust for the Always Next Year Podcast Studio Network. You can find the team on our Twitter at ANYPodcast or on our website, www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com. And now, to bring us in, the Jackdaws.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me and square off on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such eager my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son still had me life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of In Cap We Trust here at the Always Next Year Podcast Studios. I am your host, Shane. I am joined by a first-time guest this week, Ty Daubert of the Painted Lines. Ty, how are you, sir?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Shane?
I'm doing well. I really appreciate you coming on. So one thing that we've begun to do now, especially with the Phillies podcast, Phillies Twitter is such a large community. We've tried to sit there and bring additional guests on. This is the first time I'm having you on. We've had Johnny on, we've had Alex, we've had Jack. So I am super excited. You think a little bit differently than each one of those guys, so I'm excited to get started.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited too.
Awesome. So first of all, where can we find your work? You work now for the Painted Lines, which was formerly Phillies front office, correct?
Yeah, it was Philly front office. Now we just rebranded this month to thepaintedlines.com. So that's where you can find some of my work. I do Philly stuff, but my main thing is that I'm credentialed and I cover the Reading Fightin' Phils, the AA affiliate for the Phillies. That's where most of my work comes from. So you can go to thepaintedlines.com and find my stuff on there, as well as on my Twitter, which you can find me at Ty Daubert.
Awesome. For our listeners who do not know you yet, just spell your last name for them so they know.
Yeah, it's Ty Daubert, Tydaubert.
Perfect. And you primarily baseball? You dabble in basketball at all? Anything like that?
Yeah, so I'm mostly a baseball guy, but I also do like basketball. I'll tweet about basketball and the Sixers, and then I've also covered some games for the Delaware Bluecoats with our site, and
awesome.
So yeah, definitely into basketball too, and I'll watch football, but baseball is for sure my main sport that I like to watch and cover.
Perfect. Well, fortunately for us, and I mean, I say fortunately, but every time controversy stirs, this makes my job so much easier. It makes our job so much easier to sit here and continue to talk on all these different topics that right now are extremely relevant in Philadelphia Phillies Twitter. One of which is manager of the Philadelphia Phillies, Gabe Kapler, constantly under fire. I don't know 100% your view. So let's start with that. Your view of Gabe Kapler from the time that hire was announced to now.
Yeah, I was definitely on board with the Kapler hire right away. I think he is a super interesting guy. I think he's a super smart guy. I like that he came from a job where he was a player development guy, and I like that he is a blend between the analytics, and he is also a former player. So he can relate to these guys, but he's also going to understand what the front office is telling him. I thought it was a really smart, out of the box, but not too far out of the box hire. And of course, there were some bumps in the road, especially the first week of last season.
For sure.
Other than that, I've been really pleased with the job that Gabe Kapler has done. I'm a supporter of Gabe.
Well, that is a good thing considering the title of our podcast is literally In Cap We Trust. It took a little bit for the rest of my team to jump on board the Cap train here, but you know I can continue to beat that conversation into their head about the evolution of what this game is now. And you said it perfectly. You know, he worked in player development. You know, so he worked with young guys in a system that is is the new baseball, is analytics. It is that advanced stats and that type of mindset. He's incredibly smart. He is very, very interesting, as you stated. And again, was a former player, so he gets it. He gets the grind, the physical grind, the mental grind of a 162 game season, the traveling, the West Coast swings back to the East Coast. He gets all of it. And I thought that for an organization that was so far behind the eight ball in terms of grasping what this new era of baseball is, he is 100% the correct hire for me. So many people within Philadelphia Phillies Twitter, sports radio listeners, WIP, things like that, are calling for his job. Some people, Angelo Cataldi, currently calling for his job simply for not benching Gene Segura. A debatable topic. The benching, not the firing of Gabe, just to be clear on that. But in a list of different things right now that is currently wrong with this 2019 Philadelphia Phillies team, we actually put up a poll, so I'm curious to see where you stand in it. On a list of things, where does Gabe Kapler fall for the blames of this current 2019 season?
I think that Gabe Kapler is very, very, very low on the list. I think that with what he has been dealt with, including, roster imperfections from the start, and then with injuries and suspensions are being put on leave, like with Herrera, and just all these circumstances, I think he has done a pretty good job. When certain guys like Cole Irvin are in your bullpen, guys like that, or Sean Rodriguez is an option that you need to utilize. There's not always a good decision to make, so you can't always blame these things on the manager. I know that for years in every sport, the first and easiest person to blame is the head coach or the manager. But you have to take it a step further and think, is the roster that he has been dealt good enough always? No, that it hasn't been, especially with this taxed bullpen. There's not always a correct decision to be made. So I think Gabe has done a fine job. I like that even though his team is maybe underperforming, he is not the kind of guy to go and throw his team under the bus. I'm just not a huge fan of that style. I like that he tries to keep it positive and will always have his guys' backs in the public eye. And I just think that he's super low on the list, and he's done a pretty solid job with how this season has gone.
Yeah, I could not agree more. So Joe Giglio actually, just shortly before we began to record, put out a tweet. The tweet reads, 7 bullpen pitchers on the IL. Aaron Nola is pitching to an ERA of 4.89. Bryce Harper is not in the top 67 in home runs. Center fielder is on administrative leave. Andrew McCutchen is out for the season. They have an even run differential. They are 5 games over 500 and currently tied for the second position in the NL wild card. Firing the manager makes 0 sense right now. Now, it is very rare that I agree with anything that Giglio says, but when I formulated this tweet and poll from the AMYP account, I had prefaced it by stating that most of our listeners are, in fact, Gabe supporters and Gabe apologists, if you will. Now, I have been proven wrong by our numbers right now, so I will let you know where we are currently at. The question was basically the exact same that I phrased to you. Where on the list would Gabe Kapler fall in terms of blame? The options were he is the problem, top 3 on the list, between 5 and 10, or he is not the problem. So 28% of the people are correct in stating that he is not the problem. I will let it slide here, provided I'm going to skew this and state that those who selected, 33% who selected between 5 and 10, they're all saying he's number 9 or 10 on the list. I'm just, for my own sanity, I'm going to state that, as these are, in fact, our followers here. 23% said top 3 on the list, and 16% are absolutely out of their mind and illogical and have stated that he is the sole problem right now. And I think you said it perfectly. It is easy to blame the manager. We as fans, we see this on-field product, and we all will develop an emotional attraction to our star players or to even to some of our role players. We don't necessarily always have that built in terms of a manager, and I've always felt that to be incredibly, incredibly unfair. So with Kapler, one of the things that we wanted to discuss this week, and me and Rob, my normal guy, will go over this as well, but I'm curious to sit here and think top three, from you, top three things to blame on the circumstances that have kind of followed this year and have made this year difficult thus far. What are three things that are easily come to mind way before you ever get to Kapler?
One thing that comes to mind right away is Odubel Herrera just making terrible decisions, being an overall bad guy, allegedly, and he put the team in a terrible position. Not that was the worst of what he did, but that not having a center fielder really kills the Phillies. After that, injuries have also really hurt this team. In the bullpen, they call up Adam Hazley and he gets hurt almost immediately. So, guys being banged up. Some of your big-time relievers like David Robertson, Tommy Hunter, Adam Morgan, and Pat Neshek, they all come to mind right off the top of my head. And some of your more reliable relievers, or guys that should have been your reliable relievers, Sir Anthony Dominguez comes to mind as well. When they get hurt, there's not many options that you have. You can't have 5 guys that are possibly your 5 best relievers on the injured list. You're not going to have a good bullpen when you have that many quality relievers on the injured list. So I'd say the injuries are another thing that come to mind for what are hurting Phillies. And I think number 3, not to just throw the blame on one guy, but I think that Maikel Franco, how underwhelming he has been, has been a huge killer to the Phillies.
For sure.
He started off the year so red hot. It looked like he had it figured out. But he has been one of the worst hitters in the major leagues since that hot start cooled off a bit. And he's put the Phillies in a bad position where Scott Kingery needs to play both third base and center field, if that makes sense, because they have two gaping holes, and he's the utility guy to fill that, and he just can't handle both. And I think that Maikel Franco is out of favor with the organization and with management for the Phillies. They had that doubleheader yesterday.
That was the biggest sign to me.
They had the doubleheader yesterday, and he did not start either end of it. They're against a lefty and a righty, and he did not get either start. And I think that shows just where he stands in the eyes of the Philadelphia Phillies right now, because he is not getting it done. You thought maybe in the beginning of the year he actually got it figured out and he could, lift the ball in the air, hit the ball out of the ballpark. But it seems the only 2 outcomes that you ever get from Maikel Franco is a pop-up in the infield or a ground ball. It's really absurd just how bad he's been and how it seems like he hasn't learned from the mistakes from the previous years. He seems to have just been the old Maikel Franco, but somehow even worse. It's just it's really disappointing, because you thought maybe things had changed in the beginning of the year, but he has been so underwhelming. And it's hurt the whole lineup. It really has.
It has. And when we built a lineup going into the season on balance, one thing that the Philadelphia Phillies truly were betting on and banking on, it's why they didn't go out and get a Mike Moustakas, is the fact that they believed Maikel Franco, who has at times shown 6-week flashes, 8-week flashes, where he can be one of the better hitters in baseball, both from an average standpoint and a power standpoint. His defense has improved each year. He is certainly limited in range, but the plays that are in front of him, he makes, and I trust him to do so. Maikel Franco is a maddening baseball player, because when you evaluate him during those periods of just white hot stretch of baseball, You see it. You see all the tools that you need to see out of a player like Franco. And to know that it is almost assuredly 100% mental for him, that he cannot get out of his own head, that he always reminds me of someone that just needs an earwig and someone literally speaking to him every second of the game to just pull your head out of your ass. Keep your head in, stay controlled with your swing. He does the same things, and we've seen it now year after year after year. He gets those stretches. He gets too comfortable. He gets too almost cocky in his approach and says, no, I know what I'm doing. And he clearly doesn't. And you're right. When you sit there and look at the back end of that lineup, and especially now when you lose Odubel and when McCutchen goes down, and you're now shifting players who were in that 6, 7, 8, suddenly now up to, leading off or having to bat 5th or 6th, like things have juggled so drastically. They desperately needed Maikel Franco to not suck. And unfortunately, that has not been the case.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head right there. They needed him to step up, and he just, other than
even
the
to
first
be a
2
competent
weeks or so,
baseball player.
Yeah, they didn't even, out of the 8-hole, a lot of the talk before the season started was, if you can get Maikel Franco as from 2018 Maikel Franco as your 8-hitter, means you have a pretty deep lineup. But they have not gotten even 2018 Maikel Franco. They have gotten someone who is much, much, much worse than that sort of, bottom of the league type of hitter since that first 2-week stretch.
It's bizarre because you take a look at somebody like Mike or like Maikel, and he's so baseball stupid that the 8-hole to me, when that lineup initiated in the beginning parts of this season, I was like, oh, holy shit. If you're going to put Franco in that 8th spot, that actually may prevent him from being an idiot because it forces patience in the box. It forces him to work at bats. It forces all of the things that go wrong for him offensively. It forces him to consciously be aware of them throughout every pitch of every at bat. And for a while he was. Then whether he was getting moved up out of necessity to the 5, 6, 7 spot, different things were happening. Then he was in and out of the lineup, and he has not been able to find it again. But in theory, an idiot like him, and that's harsh to say, but he is baseball stupid. If you put him in that 8th spot, you should have found a competent baseball player for 162 games this year, or 150 games this year. And it's just a damn shame that it has not worked out that way. And you take a look right now at an offense that is sputtering. How big would it be to have a guy who can, provide some lift in the second half of that order? It would be huge.
Yeah, my biggest gripe with him is not the intelligence, whatever. Not everyone is that kind of player like, say, Andrew McCutchen is, where he's really good at working counts, really good at base running and all that type of things. That's not everyone. I am not going to hold that against Franco. My big issue is they stressed to him at the beginning of the season that you need to lift the ball in the air. You can't hit so many grounders. And it just seems like every time he gets up to the plate,
rolls over to third base,
he hits a ground ball. And he honestly hits very hard ground balls a lot of the time. But in today's Major League Baseball, where teams are smarter than ever and they know exactly where to put infielders to make sure that ground balls do not get through holes, it isn't going to work no matter how hard you hit the ball. You have to lift the ball, hit line drives, and hard fly balls out of the ballpark. You cannot rely on hitting the ball on the ground, and he just does it too much, and it's infuriating because he knows that he can't do it, but he's still doing it somehow. It's just an incredibly frustrating situation with Franco.
It is completely mind-boggling, and while on that, stylistically and philosophically, this game has changed. It has become incredibly specialized, and you said it. Teams and organizations, they are smarter than ever. They are fully using all of the information that is available to them in efforts to be as prepared as possible, not just for each game, not just for each at bat, but every single pitch. You see it with index cards in the outfield where they shift based on counts and based on tendencies of hitters. You see it with infield alignments, right? seemingly now for almost ever. Do you know of any hitters that get played basically straight up anymore? It almost never happens.
Yeah, it's pretty uncommon.
It is. And in today's game, we hear it constantly. And so I'm going to ask, do you think that for the average just pop in, pop out type of fan, hey, I like baseball, but I don't live and breathe this sport, do you think this game has become over specialized to the point that certain people just cannot enjoy it any longer?
I don't think that. I think that the people who say that we're not going to like baseball in the first place, I think that a lot of the issues with people saying that the game has become unwatchable or too boring or whatever, it stems from a lot of the announcers, I think, because a lot of the announcers...
It's interesting.
A lot of the announcers on the games you are actually watching, well, all they'll do is complain about today's game and how it was so much better back in their day. So when the average fan walks in, starts to watch a game on TV, and John Smoltz is the color commentator, and all he does is talk about how today's game is bad and it's boring and it was so much better when he played, why would they want to watch when all they hear is how bad it is? I think that is a huge issue, just the type of that mentality of, today's game is bad and it was so much better back in our day. I think that really kills a lot of that really hurts the game, I think. There are some things about baseball that aren't as great to watch, pitching changes, although it's smart to use more relievers like teams are doing now. Time in between pitching changes isn't always fun to sit through, but I think a lot of it just comes from the, attitude and mentality of how the game is presented to the casual fan.
So that's actually super interesting. Taking the stance that fans are essentially audibly conditioned to disagree with the product that they're watching, and because who is selling that product as the announcers, are oftentimes former players from different eras of baseball, and not all people, ex-players included, have the ability to adapt to change. Change is something that is different, and if you had it your way, would you remove the ex-players that end up in the booth, especially for nationally televised games, which are the most important for the sport, and put younger guys who have played this generation of baseball, this style of baseball, but maybe they didn't cut it, maybe they're ex-college athletes? Is that something that you think would pique more interest to people, the casual fan coming in?
Yeah, I do. I don't think you have to completely remove former players, but there are certain guys that come to mind, like John Smoltz is someone that I just mentioned, sure, where they go out of their way, it seems, to criticize baseball. It's almost like they don't enjoy watching baseball. And you tune into a Braves broadcast and they're complaining about today's game and players wearing chains, and why is Chase Utley wearing a T-shirt instead of a jersey during batting practice? It's like, who cares? But there are guys that I think are good ambassadors for the game. I think Alex Rodriguez, he may not be the greatest announcer, but I think he does a good job of that. He does little segments on Sunday Night Baseball where they show him interacting with today's stars, and he'll talk about how good they are and how fun they are, and I think that's a great thing. So maybe not necessarily get rid of former players, because that also helps with the viewership, I think, to see a familiar face of a guy that you can remember from the past, or someone who's well known. But I think that if you're going to put someone on the air, please make sure that they at least pretend like they enjoy watching the sport that they're going to commentate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and something that honestly had not quite considered. So speaking to a fan base in Philadelphia who is, I don't love to sit here and criticize our fan base. More often than not, I'm apologizing for our fan base and hoping to God I can get through to different people. But do you think that this analytics type of movement in this new age of baseball kind of snuck up on this organization, and in turn snuck up on these fans to to playing a style of baseball and having a manager such as Gabe Kapler, that kind of new school manager. Do you think this just snuck up on this fan base to the point that we haven't been given the time to truly understand what we're watching right now?
Oh, I completely do think that it snuck up on this fan base in this city because, the prior regime before Clentak, guys like Ruben Amaro and managers like Charlie Manuel, Ryan Sandberg, and Pete McCannon, they just weren't that analytic guy. And the Phillies really were, as you said before, they were so far behind the eight ball. They just were not caught up to speed with the rest of the league when it came to analytic departments and things like that. So I think the Phillies fans and Philadelphia fans, they kind of got used to a certain way of things operating with guys like Amaro in office and things like that. And you could see it as soon as Matt Clentak was hired. They didn't like the idea of, this young guy getting hired and he was an analytics guy. It's just not their thing. And winning will cure that. I think the Phillies last year collapsing like they did and this year underperforming to an extent will rile everyone up and say, oh, look, here's that analytics nonsense. It doesn't work. But the Philadelphia Eagles are also one of the more analytically minded teams.
Which makes me laugh so much.
Yeah.
Fans of one are most likely fans of both. And the fact that they do not see those advancements in that game, but they recognize it's madness. It does drive me crazy. We've made that.
Winning does shut the fans up, I believe. So what they'll do is they don't acknowledge it when things are going well. And I think that's fair because when your team's losing, you're going to complain about things. But when they're winning, you're not going to, whether it's using methods you like or not. So if you're not going to, criticize analytics when it's working for the Philadelphia Eagles and they just win you a Super Bowl. But when you think the Phillies are using too much analytics and they're underperforming, I think it makes sense for people to complain about it. And not that I think they're right, but it does make sense that they would, be outspoken about that.
So how do you think now players, media reaches so many different outlets at this point, and players are not naive to what the fan base thinks of them. How much pressure do you think this current Philadelphia Phillies roster and Gabe Kapler, who again are certainly not naive to the noise right now, whether it's coming from radio stations, whether it's coming from podcasts like ours, whether it's coming from within their ballpark right next to you, how much pressure do you think it puts on them to know that this fan base isn't in full support of what baseball is today, and the only way, as you've mentioned, that they're going to change that mind is to win? Do you think there's added pressure there for this team and for that coach's room?
I think I do because, as Gabe Kapler has said before, he pays attention to what people write and what they post and what they're saying about the team. And in an age where every baseball player is going to have social media, they're aware of what people say. They read things. Sure. I think it does add some pressure to the team. I think that Gabe Kapler, possibly in the back of his mind, knows that there are expectations for this team, and if they were to somehow miss the playoffs, I think he could be without a job after this season. I think the team has these things in the back of their mind, not necessarily on the forefront, but they think about it a little bit, and it does create a little bit of pressure for them. I do think that they'll overcome these struggles that they are having right now. They'll probably not, be as good as they were for the first week of the season, but they're definitely not as bad as they're playing right now. And I think that they will still probably win the division, and at the very worst, they will make the wild card game. But I think that these players and the coaching staff know. I think they know the expectation is to make the playoffs at the very least. and they know that jobs could be in jeopardy if they don't meet that expectation.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there. So now all of my listeners know I'm very pro this new style of baseball and the analytic movement. I like information. I like the chess matches that occur, especially in the National League. Not to say that the American League is bad baseball. It isn't, but there's a difference. I love the challenges that we face, and I love the preparedness that these coaches and managers and players have to overcome in order to succeed. It intrigues the hell out of me, and I think the game is better for it. I'm curious, and I'm getting the impression you're a supporter of this as well. But what is your overall personal view of the game of baseball today?
I think the game is as smart as it has ever been. I think the players, both pitching and hitting, the players are as good as they've ever been. And, the league is, I think it's the best that it's ever been. It's different than it was because I think that the players have gotten better. So back in the 80s when guys were hitting the ball around the field more, the pitchers just weren't as good, and guys weren't as strong or as good to just hit the ball out of the ballpark almost at will like they can today. So it creates a different product, a product that everyone isn't used to. But I think that people are just better at the game of baseball, and I think it's really good to watch that kind of talent. And I agree about the chess match kind of product that is being put on the field. I think matchups. I think stuff like Gabe Kapler did last year, where he mixed up the lineups. It seemed like every day. I think those kind of things are interesting, and I think that it creates for a really cool type of product to follow throughout a season, and it creates a cool. It's just an interesting thing to follow all throughout a season. And are there improvements to be made to the game? Of course, but what sport doesn't have flaws, and what league doesn't have flaws? Sports are
constantly evolving. Whether it's, as you mentioned, whether it's bodies being faster and stronger, whether it is having the access to further information or having that one person who changes the way that we think. Every game has evolved by the decade, by the week.
Exactly.
These games are meant to continue to evolve. This is not the same game that it was when it was originated. And with each passing era of baseball, we find things we love and things we don't. The difference that I feel as though people like us are more aware of than what that casual fan is aware of is that I know I can't change this game. I have to enjoy it for as it's presented to me, and I have to understand it as they are presenting it to me. And I find it as interesting as you do. For those people who do not, for those people who are still stuck in that previous era of baseball, the Charlie Manuel managers, for those people, if you could explain it and kind of sum it up as to why they should be a little more open-minded to today's philosophy and today's baseball, explain it, tell it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. How would you sell this game to someone who is not in love with it right now?
Yeah, so I think a reason to kind of buy into this smart baseball is if you have a team that you root for, if they are buying into the new wave of analytics and all that, they're doing their best to kind of go all out to win. And I think that is a really important thing as a fan. You don't want your team to be behind the curve. You want your team to be ahead of the curve. So if the team you're rooting for is into all this stuff, they're doing what they can to put the best product on the field for the fans. And I think that's a very important thing as a fan to root for. And another thing, who does not love the long ball? Like, seriously, home runs are super exciting, and strikeouts are super exciting. I'm not sure why everyone has this kind of obsession with putting the ball in play. And yeah, it can get kind of boring with the 3 true outcomes. I get that. But I'm not sure, increasing ground outs to second base instead of strikeouts really makes the game any more exciting. So I think you just have to appreciate what these players are and like what the game is today. It's a super exciting game with guys hitting the ball out of the ballpark more than ever, and you should just appreciate what there is today because guys are stronger than ever, throwing the ball harder than ever, and there's a ton of interesting storylines and a ton of interesting players to follow.
I agree, and as you've mentioned throughout this entire pod, winning and success does cure those things. If you're looking at, a pitcher who can be as dominant as somebody like Scherzer was, yesterday against us, that can go out there and again light up a radar gun like he hadn't to that point in this season. You see the way he gets amped up for a divisional matchup, and he strikes out 10. Like, that's impressive. And if you can't get excited for that for the game of baseball, maybe it's just not for you. But while curing things, specifically here in this city, we have struggled on both sides of the baseball or the baseball field at this point, offensively and defensively, or offensively and pitching, we should say. Each different reasons as to why we are struggling. What do you kind of attribute this offensive struggle to this point in the season? I personally don't think that it is Gabe Kapler. I think that he has done what he can in efforts to kind of reignite and get some of these guys jump started and going. We're seeing it tonight with Harper Hoskins at 1-2. He's done what he can. What do you attribute most of the underwhelming offensive output to be to this point in the season?
You see, I really don't know other than just guys underperforming. Some people are calling for John Maley's job as hitting coach, and I don't know if that is the right move, especially mid-season. But I think it comes down to a lot of, at the beginning of the year, guys were overperforming highly, and right now they're underperforming to kind of, regress to the mean. But I'm not sure if there's one singular thing to kind of pinpoint to describe the offensive struggles. Of course, losing your leadoff hitter and the guy who may have been your best player to that point, Andrew McCutchen, that hurts your whole team, losing a guy like that. So that's another thing. That's another thing that is super tough. But I don't know if there's just one thing to pinpoint because, different guys are having different struggles. They're struggling with different things. And I'm just
it does
not
appear
sure
at this point that each of these players' individual struggles seem to be coming in the things that they're kind of known for. You look at Gene Segura, a guy who doesn't strike out, is striking out a lot. He doesn't look like he's seeing the baseball well, dropping to a knee constantly. He hasn't been the contact guy that we were sold. And when he is, we're a vastly different baseball team, very much so in the ways that we were when Jimmy Rollins was hot, so was the Phillies. That is how important Gene Segura and his contact tool is to the Philadelphia Phillies. He hasn't been that. Harper, obviously known for his power. I think Harper's having a nice season. Is it a superstar season? Certainly not. But he's lacking in that power department. Rhys Hoskins is a notoriously streaky player. Honestly, he could hit 15 home runs in the next 18 games, and it wouldn't shock me. But to this point, he's in a serious downswing where he's striking out. Well, he's walking a little bit now too. But each of these players up and down the lineup, with the exception of maybe Kingery, is kind of struggling in what their identity is most known for. And I find that to be super, super interesting. And to me, that says players are pressing. That to me looks and sounds exactly like that would be the reason. You mentioned John Maley. We talk about him on the show. Rob, my typical co-host, loathes John Maley. And to me, it's the same argument as the Kapler thing. Now, I would get rid of John Maley, but for different reasons than most. I take a look at someone like John Maley, who's been fired very early into his tenures, throughout his entire career as a hitting coach. Offenses do get better after him. To me, I think players today, more so than ever, are very prideful. And I feel as though when you lose someone's job for them, and that's exactly how I do believe the majority of that clubhouse will see it, it elevates you. That is like the ultimate FU. You want to go into the box and you want to come out of it because you feel for it. And I do feel like there are a lot of players in the clubhouse right now, not all of them. I do feel like a lot of them would respond to losing one of their own coaches as a result of their inability to play and to be successful at the tools that got them there in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, but I'm not sure how the players would respond. Maybe they respond that way, or maybe it goes completely the other way. And I don't know if midseason that is necessarily the risk you would want to take, but it's certainly a fair point, and it's a really interesting idea that you just pointed out about maybe the players would fire them up.
Yeah, one thing that we heard, and I don't remember if it was Rob on our show or if it was Connor in my group text, but we kind of liken it to the Hackstall move. There's a certain energy there, and when you get someone fired, or if that's the way you feel, you're pissed off. Look at the interviews from Claude Giroux. Look at the interviews from Couturier or Konechny. That was a difficult time for that locker room. I would expect nothing different in the Philadelphia Phillies clubhouse. If you lose someone like Mahle. Now the other side to that is if you remove Mahle and this team continues to underperform offensively, I think you basically guarantee that Kapler isn't back next season if they do not win a playoff series or make it to the playoffs. And that's tough for me. I feel as though not firing Mahle mid-season, if the team continues to underperform, I don't think. So you said that you felt like Kapler very well may be gone next year if they don't make the playoffs. I actually think it would probably be Mahle. And it would be a short lease next year for Kapler, which I would prefer. But, again, I can see both sides of that particular argument. One thing that has not helped them has been the pitching. Now, whether it be the injuries or whether it be Klentak not addressing the fourth or fifth spot of the rotation going into the season, there's a multitude of different things that you can kind of pinpoint as reasons why we should be frustrated with this pitching staff. For you, what is your main reason that you find frustration right now in the pitching, whether it be the rotation or whether it be the pen?
I think that the main thing of frustration for me is probably Aaron Nola's struggles. It seemed going into the season that with the pitching staff especially, there was one given. There was one for sure thing, and that was Aaron Nola's your ace. And this season, it has not gone that way. He has been pretty bad, to put it bluntly. He's underperformed.
He's not been good.
He's underperformed. He's not pitching well. There's not much else you can say, and that has been super disappointing. You needed that ace, that anchor to kind of just, get you through the season with 1 out of 5 days being almost a guaranteed win. And you have not had that, and with guys getting hurt in the bullpen and your other starters not being great, it puts the Phillies in a super tough spot. And hopefully Aaron Nola can turn it around from this point on. But he has not shown much this season to kind of prove that that'll happen. So Aaron Nola is probably what the person or the thing that has disappointed me the most up to this point from the pitching staff.
So 100% agree, but for the benefits of the argument, let's play the other side of the coin. Going into the season, you and I assume, the Philadelphia Phillies fan base and the organization and Matt Klentak assume their one sure thing is Aaron Nola. Arrieta was going to be a wild card. We hoped that given the fact that he ended up struggling with a torn meniscus last season, that maybe we would get a competent, a pitcher that was a solid 3, maybe a 2, but a true major league pitcher that we could throw out there every 5 days and feel fine about. Then you were banking on 3 guys to figure it out. Three guys that had very up and down seasons last year and have had up and down careers to this point. You were banking on a breakout Pivetta. You were hoping to God that Vince Velasquez put it together. Eflin was kind of like the least of the wild cards. He's also the least sexy, but he's been the most consistent this year. When you take a look at those four other complete unknowns and total wild cards, I don't understand how Klentak can say, we got Harper, we traded for Sakura, we signed Kutch, early on in free agency, we traded for JT Realmuto. Fuck it, let's just wing the pitching staff. Let's go with what we got. No. Charlie Morton was there. Guys like Jay Happ, who again is not having a strong season by any means, but there were other major league pitching options there that would have been a far more sure bet to be major league caliber pitching than what we've seen out of our starting rotation to this point. Now, fortunately, Pivetta has bounced back to this point from his demotion down to AAA. I loved his mindset about it. I respect the hell out of him. Zach Eflin right now has been our rotation. He has been a godsend. Vince Velasquez is being yo-yoed around, and it's not his fault, in my opinion, that he has had the struggles that he has had. But this, to me, goes back down to, now, again, my biggest thing, I agree with you, disappointment is Nola. But when I take a look at this, holistically over this entire period of time, I do not understand how the hell your general manager puts that much into an offense and says, we're going to wait for pitching. That was moronic to me.
I don't necessarily I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that letting Morton go for as cheap as he did was a pretty bad decision. He was a guy that you were familiar with. You already signed him once, so you probably could have gotten him again. Exactly. But once he was gone, I think that seeing what you had with the starting rotation and then planning on improving at the deadline I was okay with that strategy. And then the bullpen having issues and Pivetta not being what they thought he was kind of messed with that plan. So I think with Vinny not being outstanding and then the bullpen also having injuries, they had to move. I think they kind of had to move him to the bullpen. And I think that you said there was kind of three wild cards, but I think that the organization didn't view Nick Pivetta as a wild card. I really think that they imagined that he would come out and start like he's pitching right now. I think that they envisioned him being the type of pitcher that he's showing he is right now. They expected that from the start, and that also really
that's a bit irresponsible. Going with a total unknown and not proven, like you're banking on something that sure, if you're right, you look like a fucking genius. But if you're wrong, you have a rotation that looks like ours has looked for the most of this season.
Yeah, it's risky, definitely risky, but I think that the organization was really banking on him, whether it was right or wrong. I don't disagree.
That was fairly apparent, especially naming him the
number two
starter. It was no secret how they viewed him. I just would have far preferred a true option, a proven option back there, and not something that we were hoping to take a leap. I am 1,000% a supporter of Nick Pivetta in the rotation. I would have done the same thing. I would have also made him the second starter in this rotation, especially after a solid spring. But I most certainly would have found an additional option leading into this season to shore up that back end. Didn't need to be a lights out starter, just someone that could go 5-6 innings and give you keep you in baseball games. And this rotation just has not been that this season.
Yeah, you saw it even at the deadline last year. It seemed that this front office had in a certain confidence in this starting rotation, and to this point, it's burned them in two straight half seasons. But it seems that they've had some kind of confidence. Yeah, I agree. The fact that it burned you twice is pretty annoying, but the plan the plan from the start of this offseason, I think, was build the offense and see what we have with the pitching staff and add at the deadline. And whether that plan was the right thing to do or not, I think it was the plan, and I think that's still probably what they're going to do. But now I'm not sure that they're convinced that they're going to win a World Series this year, so I think the move could go something from, instead of it being a big blockbuster for an ace type of guy, I think they could be adding a 3-4-5 type of starting pitcher at the deadline instead. But I think we will see a certain upgrade to the starting rotation around the deadline.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the most interesting arguments that we have had in recent weeks here at AMYP, is whether or not they truly will believe that, hey, year one, we believe we are still a World Series contender. We believe that we can, we're a piece or two away from being in the same class as the Dodgers. Or if they just have to get creative and make more Jay Bruce type of deals, and see about let's just hope this guy can plug a hole right now. Let's hope that we can, like you mentioned, we can acquire a 3, 4, or 5 starter, not the sexiest of options, but a Joe Blanton-esque type of player. That to me seems like the more appropriate and responsible way to go. However, in a market like Philadelphia right now, with a fan base who is just so striving for an immediate satisfaction, it would not shock me if the organization said, fuck it, let's hit the luxury tax now. Let's burn some of the prospects that we have, or let's just go for a Greinke and eat the contract, and lessen the prospects sent over. It's going to be a really interesting 6-7 weeks leading into this deadline, and it's going to be, and again, with only the one deadline this year, it makes it even more interesting. So it's something we will continue to follow here. I'm sure you'll tweet about it constantly as well. So, all of our followers can now follow you as well. Before we get totally, or before we sign off here, you're a credentialed reporter for the Reading Phillies right now. So you get firsthand look and conversations with some of the up and coming prospects that are in the Philadelphia Phillies system, some of whom could be traded in a matter of weeks, others who are clearly part of the future. So if it's cool with you, I want to ask you a little bit about some of these players.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So Mickey Moniak is probably now this is the first season that he's playing kind of in age class. If you think about it, drafted number 1 overall out of high school. Started off slow in Double-A, but has really, really turned it on over the last, 40, 45 days or so. What are some of the things that you're seeing from Mickey Moniak right now that show that he's beginning to feel that confidence again, and that he starts to look like he belongs in the class that he's in?
Yeah, so Mickey was one of the first players I talked to at the beginning of the season. Opening night got rained out, and we talked to him after it was officially rained out, just about outlooks for the season, and then I did an interview with him the very next day, and I did an article about him. But some of the things he said and that we talked about was just him maturing a bit physically. So what people, when they formed an opinion on him, was when he was an 18, 19-year-old, and he struggled. He was young, and he was not physically matured. But now he's talked about he feels that he's gotten bigger and stronger, and just has felt like his body has matured better, and it's going to help him. And I think he's shown that a lot this season. He's really starting. Go ahead.
So I was saying, how much do you think that, now this has been something that's also been fairly well documented to this point anyway, how much do you think it helps having someone like Bryce Harper in the organization who is a phone call away at all times to kind of help you out and talk you up a little bit? Bryce has spoke, very well of a very young Mickey Moniak, and Moniak, again, crediting him to stating just how awesome it is to have a player of Bryce's caliber in your clubhouse.
Yeah, so I talked to Mickey on that opening night that got rained out in Reading, and we talked about his experiences in big league spring training, and he talked about the impact Bryce had, just letting him know that Bryce has his back. He was able to talk to him about certain things, the pressures of being a number one overall pick Bryce wasn't out of high school, but being a young number one overall pick, and just the pressures of being a top prospect and hitting it all, and things like that. So that was a really important thing for him that he talked about, and he talked about his relationship with Bryce, said it was really good, and that was an important thing for him to get out of big league spring training.
I think so as well. And you know, it also speaks volumes, not only to Mickey for being receptive to a player such as Bryce. You know, I think most young players would, but it does speak volumes to the character of Bryce Harper. You know, knowing this is a young guy, you know, drafted in the same spot that Bryce was drafted, you know, in an arguably far, you know, more, I don't know, intense market than what Washington was. The difference is Bryce Harper's been famous since, I don't know, he was born. You know, Mickey's certainly not that case, but I do feel as though there's going to be a kind of a connection there for years to come, provided again Mickey, you know, remains with the Philadelphia Phillies, you know, through the next few seasons at least. But he's certainly, you know, an interesting player. He's a player that I was stoked about when we drafted him. I remember I was down the shore. And rather than actually doing any shore-related activity and hanging out, I locked myself in a room and watched the draft because I'm an adult and that's what I do. But I was super stoked about Mickey. What are some of the things you know that you can say that he, you know, the on-field things that we can physically see that have improved over the last, you know, few months here at AA?
Yeah, so Moniak, he has not been walking. That's the big issue with him this year, I'd say. His average in AA this year is 261, but his on-base percentage is only 305, so that's clearly not great. But he plays a very good outfield in both center and right field, and he is hitting a lot of line drives and hitting the ball hard. I believe he leads the league in triples and is pretty high up there in doubles as well. So that's something good to see out of him. So he could maybe work on plate discipline and drawing walks a little bit more, but the line drive hitting is coming along well, and he's definitely playing a really good outfield right now.
Super encouraging things to hear and see. Yeah, I think I go to a Reading game, I don't know, probably once every homestand, twice every homestand. You know, and some of the things I've noticed, you know, the same. There's a confidence. He runs really, really smart routes too. You know, and that was something that a few weeks back I had noticed a ball that he chased down in the gap when he was on right. You know, he just seems to have a really good eye for the baseball. You know, and that's something you don't always see out of young players. You know, there's a kind of a change in process there, but he's looked smooth, and that's super, super encouraging. Let's talk about another former first round pick, the former power hitting shortstop out of Georgia, Cornelius Randolph, who was drafted. It was the year right before Mickey, right? It's the year before,
yeah,
years before. I can't recall.
Yeah, 2015.
You know, obviously the organization was super intrigued with, you know, the power potential. Again, a high school shortstop with big power was kind of what he was known for when he was drafted. Has had a slower development, we would say, going for this is now his third year. I think this is his third year in AA. Does that sound right?
This is his second year.
Second year. Did he have a cup of coffee 3 years ago? Is that what I was thinking? I can't recall.
No, he was in Single A all of 2017, but he was in AA full time last year and this year.
All right, so the differences from last year to this year, you know, is he starting to kind of come into his own? We saw the power numbers jump a little bit over last season. You know, what can you tell us right now about Cornelius Randolph? Kind of a forgotten, you know, outfield prospect when you look at names like Moniak and Hazley.
Yeah, so the second half of last year, Randolph, he really heated up, and you saw flashes of power, and you even saw it a little bit early this year. But other than that, he's kind of cooled off. He has kind of cooled off. His on-base percentage this year is only 299, slugging only 376. So he hasn't been great. But there's been flashes of maybe the power hitter that they thought they were getting when they drafted him. But definitely not great out of Cornelius Randolph.
He's always a player that intrigues me. You know, I've I don't know that I've always been very in favor outside of the Moniak pick. I was quite excited for that. But position players, drafted at the age of 18, 17, 18, 19, I always feel like that's just a really difficult thing. High round, first round, second round, third round, somewhere in there. So he's been an interesting follow so far for me. I was there for, I think it was his second career Reading home run at least at Reading, and it was very much so a Reading ballpark home run, but still cool to see. So again, for any of our followers who continue to ask about some of the prospects, definitely get up to Reading and take a look at well, pretty much the entirety of the outfield right now. Let's go over to two more prospects here. We'll go one pitching and then one who is currently in Single A. Let's start with Adonis Medina. Didn't start great. Definitely coming into his own now. Starting to see the Adonis Medina that is what we think. And for a player who right now is constantly in trade talks or theories of trade talks, do you see him more as a future Philadelphia Philly, or do you see him as the piece that could be potentially moved in a deal for a Robbie Ray or a Mike Minor?
I think that Medina will probably end up staying past the deadline this year. Earlier this season, I thought that he would most definitely be gone in a trade, but now that I've shifted kind of what I think the Phillies will trade for, more of a back end starter than a front of the rotation starter. I'm starting to think that he'll probably be here at the end of the year still. But he's really been a lot better since the weather started to warm up around mid-May. I was at his last two starts, and they were his two best starts of the season. On June 7th against Harrisburg, he went 6 scoreless innings, and then last week against Erie, he went 7 1/3 of 2-run ball and was really good. His slider has looked really good. Throws it in the mid 80s, and he has a really nice sinker. So he's starting to come along pretty nicely now that the weather has warmed up.
One thing I've always noticed about Medina, and this is something I notice about a lot of young pitchers, his mechanics are something that have always concerned me. He seems very up tall. Seems to fly open often. I have not watched his last 2-3 starts in person. Does it look like he's starting to kind of close up and use more of his body and follow through? Are those mechanics cleaning up at all?
Yeah, his last start, I feel like that was pretty noticeable. He just looked really sound, and he was getting a lot of bite on his slider, and that was something really encouraging to see from him. So I think he might have, picked up on some of those things and made a couple changes to his delivery. But like I said, his slider looked really good in that last start, and even 2 starts ago, it was looking pretty good as well.
Always good to hear that the organization's now top pitching prospect is beginning to really kind of take in Double-A. And let's go to the last name here. A guy who is kind of cruising through A-ball right now is last year's number 3, I think it was number 3 overall pick, Alec Boehm, who, again, playing mainly third base, DHing in the minors a little bit there, playing a little bit of first base as well. Extremely exciting guy. He's a guy who is very Hazley-like in terms of his track. I believe that at some point next year he will probably be with the Phillies, whether that be early on in the season, whether that be mid-season or a September call-up. I feel like at some point next year is when we're destined to see Alec Boehm. But you will see him far sooner than we will. What are some of the things that you're excited about seeing with the organization's top infield prospect and top position playing prospect?
Yeah, he's absolutely raking right now. He's really hitting the ball well in Single A. So I'm hoping maybe he'll get a promotion halfway through this season, maybe pretty soon. And I just think that it'll be exciting to see how he fares against Double-A pitching. Double-A is usually where the really top tier prospects are. So it'll be interesting to see how he can do against that type of pitching at that level.
Yeah, I agree. And again, Reading being fairly close to where I'm at, we try to get down there, fairly often to check out some of the more exciting prospects of the Philadelphia Phillies organization. Alec Bohm is certainly one who we are eagerly anticipating the call up to Double A, as he has again cruised through Lakewood, cruised through Clearwater to this point, and showing a little bit of corner versatility there. One thing I'm super impressed with. And, obviously we're not seeing a lot of it as we're, not there. But one thing that we are constantly hearing is that he is holding his own defensively. And for a guy who's kind of stiff, very tall, the corner infield for him is something that especially third base, there's concern. Most people leading into this draft did not see him long term as a third baseman. The Philadelphia Phillies were adamant in stating that they do. So I'm curious to see how he continues to adjust, not just at the plate, but certainly in the field at third base, or whether he ends up transitioning to first or even left field at some point. We'll see. But a lot of interesting stuff there with a guy like Alec Bohm. So super impressed with his really, really quick rise to this point. So Ty, we're going to wrap stuff up here, man. You have any final thoughts for us? Anything interesting? Anything you want to rant about?
My final thought is I've been getting a lot of hate on Twitter for this, but I just want to let everyone know that I am the only Andrew Knapp supporter out there. I think
Sweet Christ.
everyone seems to hate on my guy Knapp, but I think he's super fun. He has a really good eye at the plate, and I just think he's a capable backup catcher, and he is one of the least of the Phillies' problems, so people should really just back off and enjoy him for what he is, because I like when he throws the seeds up after a home run. He's just a really fun guy. Leave him alone.
I cannot believe that Andrew Knapp's name was mentioned in a final thought on my podcast. That is amazing.
I just had to get it out there. I had to.
Well, one thing I will say is, so long as your starting catcher is JT Realmuto in his prime, Andrew Knapp being the backup is not a problem. I'm not a fan of Andrew Knapp, but he's only going to play 15 times. And if we had literally any kind of semblance of a bench right now, we would freaking never see him. We wouldn't have to see him pinch hit. He right now is one of the only actual options on the bench to possibly draw a walk and never, ever get a hit. But still, draw a walk, as you've mentioned. Good eye. I can't.
He has a good eye, and he broke up. He broke up Brandon Woodruff's perfect game. So,
oh God. Brandon Woodruff owns the Philadelphia Phillies.
He also rakes. It's kind of ridiculous. He might be a better hitter than Andrew Knapp, but he doesn't have the same eye. He doesn't have the same eye.
He is a damn good hitter. I think, what does he have? 5 hits on the year against us in 2 starts, I think. So crazy. Yeah, unbelievable. Guys, pitchers who rake, man. Gotta love it. What a new age of baseball. And something you only find in the National League, which is so sexy. Gotta love it. National League baseball over AL every day of the week.
Definitely.
All right. Well, just a quick word from our sponsors before we head out. It is Just Food in Buckingham Green. It is in Bucks County, PA. Their in-store location is just above Peddler's Village, if you keep following down on York Road there. They do sandwiches. They do entrees. They do everything in-store. They are phenomenal food. They also cater. So they've catered different events for me. They've catered different events for my family. Ask for Rob. Tell him Shane from AMYP sent you. Again, it is Just Food. It is 215-794-FOOD. Treat yourself. Take it home. Ty, it has been awesome having you on show. I'm so glad we finally got you on here. Why don't you again remind everyone where we can get your work and what your Twitter handle is?
Yeah, so you can find my writing on thepaintedlines.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Ty Daubert. That's TYDAUBERT. Thanks again for having me on. It's been a super fun time talking about the Phillies. I had a blast.
Awesome. We will definitely have you back on again. You can always find or follow the podcast at ANY Podcast. You can also go to our website, which is our main source of all of our mailbag questions. So if you subscribe to the website, you can email us through there. The website is www.alwaysnextyearpodcast.com. And you can follow me, the host of In Cap We Trust. It's not like it's my own show or anything. Is at Shane_Mead, and we'll be back later this week with an additional episode of In Cap We Trust. Ty, thanks again, sir.
Thank you.
A fighting man I used to be, revered and feared through Killarney. Now I'm back to hitching with the wind. But if Mickey Flynn should ever find me, I'll throw me caution all behind me. on that son of a bitch again. He cracked open a river too, he beat me Sunday through and through, and such over my unconscious frame. I won me healthy sheriff fights, well lucky son, still happy life since Mickey Flynn beat me dumb and lame.
This has been a production of the Always Next Year Podcast Network. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, Spreaker, and SoundCloud. Please also remember to rate and review this podcast to validate our members' life choices. We appreciate it. This is AMYP, signing off.